Heidi Alexander, the Secretary of State for Transport. Very good morning to you, Minister.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. Troops on the ground. This is something that has grabbed a lot of headlines in the last 48 hours. Is it something that the Cabinet's been discussing for weeks and months as something that might be potentially needed in due course?
So I think what the Prime Minister has made clear in the last 48 hours is that the UK is willing to step up to the plate along with our European allies and with the US to find a way to bring about a lasting and enduring peace in Ukraine. The war and the bloodshed that has gone on for the last few years is horrific, and to think that this is happening on our own continent, on the European continent, I think for many of us a couple of years ago would have been completely unfathomable. And so I think the Prime Minister, in being part of the discussions yesterday in Paris, going off to the US to talk with President Trump, is being clear that we need to play our part, but there has to be a US security guarantee. We can't also have a situation where there's a ceasefire, but there hasn't been a lasting peace negotiated, and it's got to be, we can't have a situation where Putin is coming back in a couple of weeks or months' time, more territorial incursions into a sovereign country, more Russian aggression. The other thing I think the Prime Minister is right to have said is that this isn't a matter just for the Ukrainian people, or frankly a matter for just Europe. It's about our national security as well, because it's about how we have peace and stability on the continent of Europe.
And you personally are in support, if necessary, of boots on the ground in Ukraine?
I support the UK playing its role in creating an enduring and lasting peace, and I think that the Prime Minister is entirely right to say that we would consider all options, and if that was part of British troops being part of an international peacekeeping force backed up by support from the US, then I don't think we should be ruling that out at this stage, but we're quite a long way away from any specific decisions being taken. There isn't a peace agreement at the moment. We're also clear that there can't be any decisions about Ukraine without Ukraine being at the table as well. And so I think the Prime Minister is right to show leadership in this and right to be honest about what the considerations are at the moment. But there's still a number of steps before we're taking any decisions on this.
Let's move on to what you're talking about from the Department of Transport today. And your press release says this landmark reform will sweep away decades of failure. How so exactly? What are you announcing?
So today we are launching a consultation on the establishment of something called Great British Railways. A couple of months ago, after the public ownership of the train companies legislation went through, we announced which of the train operating companies would be brought into public ownership. That's South Western in May, C2C in July, and Greater Anglia later this autumn. But we also need to do a fundamental rewiring of the structures of the railways. So we're going to be establishing this brand new organisation, which is called Great British Rail. It brings together the management of the trains, the day-to-day operation of the trains, with the people who manage the tracks, the signalling, the infrastructure. At the moment, we've got this dizzying array of organisations that are involved in running the railways, 14 train operating companies, Network Rail, different bits of government. We want to simplify that to ensure that people get more reliable, better train services, and that we offer better value for money to the taxpayer as well, because in the current arrangements, there's a huge amount of waste and inefficiency.
I'm confused as to who ultimately is responsible for the performance of our trains, because you also talk about devolved leaders having more of a say on the railways and the performance in their areas, whereas most of the gist of the rest of the announcement is about centralisation to Great British Railways. So who is ultimately held to account on the performance of the railways?
So it will be Great British Railways. Great British Railways will be the single guiding mind, and the people employed by that organisation will be the people that the Secretary of State or the mayors in devolved areas could turn to and say, why is there a problem on that bit of infrastructure with that particular service? can you go and sort it out? You're right to actually express some confusion at the moment about who is in charge. If you think back to 2018, when there was this awful timetabling fiasco on the East Coast Main Line, the then Transport Secretary, Chris Grayling, said, well, whose fault is it? Who should I fire? And there was no answer because it was clear as mud. We have got to strip away this confusion in the running of the railways. We've also got a situation, I'll give you this example, where there are hundreds of people employed by train operating companies to work out whose fault it is that delays have happened. Now, if you or I are sat on a train, we're not interested in whose fault it is. We just want the problem fixed. The train operating companies are focused on this because they get compensation from a different part of the railway. It's a big financial merry-go-round. I want people focused on preventing these problems from happening in the first place.
Why not just go one step further and nationalise the railways? And I say that, really very seriously. It's an industry where private operators are allowed to make profit, but they get a lot of government subsidy. And on top of that, the outcomes, I think it's fair to say, aren't perfect for consumers. Is it not a good example of, perhaps a rare example, but a good example where nationalisation has its merits?
This is nationalisation. There will be one public sector.
All of the private sector.
We don't have to buy up the train operating companies because we either take them into public ownership when their contract with us expires, or we terminate their contract at a point when a certain break clause has been reached. So there's no cost to the taxpayer in this. All of the train operating companies by the end of 2027 will be in public ownership and they will become part of Great British Railways. They will be part of the same organisation that also looks after the tracks and the infrastructure so that coordinated, joined-up decisions can be made. I mean, we've got also a ridiculous situation with ticketing at the moment, haven't we, where, as a nation, we've accepted that the way to get the cheapest fare is to buy a split ticket that takes you from A to B to C to get to D. Now, this is a ludicrous situation. We need to simplify those fares. We need to make the railways more reliable and we need to make it a more attractive proposition for the customers so more people turn to travelling on our railways.
Heidi Alexander, thanks so much for joining us today. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.